This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another Wolff Responds. I want to talk with you briefly now about the Ukraine war. After a good year, maybe I shouldn't use the word good, a year of this war, it has certainly been a horror for the people of Ukraine, particularly the eastern part of Ukraine. No words would be adequate to the level of suffering and loss that has occurred in that part of the world. If ever it was true that it was a tragedy to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's true of the Ukrainians in that part of the world. And indeed, I should add the Russians as well. Okay, but I want to be honest and I want to be factual about where things stand after a year. You don't need me to give you the propagandistic view, neither from the one side nor from the other. So I want to get to the core realities. There are, in fact, historical precedents for what's going on. And the most important of those in my mind is the fact that people who start wars, people who engage in warfare, very rarely understand what they're getting into and constantly make terrible mistakes of judgment. I think that's going on in Ukraine, but I want to give you historical examples so that you get clearly what I'm after. The first point, the United States in recent years invaded three small, poor countries: Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. In every one of those cases, we were told at the beginning that the overwhelmingly dominant force of the United States relative to each of those countries would make the war short and quick and decisive. And none of that happened in any of those three wars. They lasted a very long time. The victory was not only quick, but the United States lost all three of those wars. It didn't turn out in any important dimension the way we had been led to believe. I believe the same thing is going on. If the Russians thought it would be short and quick, they were wrong. If the Ukrainians and NATO thought that they had the power to withstand Russia militarily, then they are also suffering the results of a delusion that afflicts people who enter wars. Wars are horrible in part because those who get into them cannot and do not know what they're getting into, even if they try very hard to pretend otherwise. Let me go on and talk about, at the end of the year, what else we know. First, we know that there isn't one war, there are two. There's a military war between Russia on the one hand, Ukraine and all of NATO, including the United States, on the other. And that war is a horrible killing field. We know that. And we know that so far the Russians have the better of it. There is no way to make believe that that isn't true, even though people on the NATO side and the Ukrainian side keep speaking of a victory which is not visible. The Russian troops are further into Ukraine than they've ever been before. The line of battle keeps moving westward. It now encompasses for the Russians the whole of the Donbass region, which is what they set out, at least that's what they said, to take over. So on the ground, we have a terrible war, far from over, in which one side, the Russians, have made the progress, the Ukrainians are trying to hold on. That's the reality. The rest is make believe. But I'm more interested in the second war, and that's an economic war. And that has Russia on one side and all of NATO and the United States on the other. Each side has imposed economic sanctions designed to hurt the other. The most dramatic was the freezing, it's called, but the honest word would be stealing of the Russian reserves, $300 billion, an enormous amount of money held in Western countries, owned by Russia, seized by those countries, and now being spoken about as a fund to rebuild Ukraine whenever this war is finally over. How has this worked out? Well, first, let me give you a statistic without which no one can understand what's going on. One of the ways you understand any economic war is look at the two sides of the war. What are the resources each side brings to the war? And one of the ways economists measure the resources of any economy is by something called the gross domestic product, the GDP. Every country has one. It's roughly a measure of the output of goods and services per year that economy is capable of producing. The GDP of the United States and its allies in NATO, if you add it all up, is approximately a little over $32 trillion. That's their economic strength. That's their economic footprint. On the other side is Russia. The GDP of Russia is $1.5 trillion. So let me be real clear, if you haven't understood this, economic war, which is what both sides call it now, economic war pits one side with $32 trillion worth of economic power and wealth against another one and a half. That should have been and would have been a slam dunk, a very quick war, a very short one, with the collapse of Russia and the victory of the West. That's what was predicted a year ago, and there was logic to it if you look at that statistic. Turns out, like with most statistics, it may be right, may be wrong. It depends on a whole lot of other variables. The numbers alone prove nothing, and that's what's happened. Russia has not collapsed, not even close. Its economy is suffering some, yes, but way less than many other countries, way less than Ukraine, for sure. And the West, NATO, with our inflation, with our difficulties, our economy is suffering also. But nothing like those numbers would have suggested. Russia's in much better shape economically than the numbers would have led us or the people running this war to escape. Here's my conclusion. We don't know what we have gotten ourselves into. It is very dangerous. It is very destructive of that country called Ukraine. And we can't know any better this year than we obviously were unable to know a year ago. My conclusion, and that of many around the world: stop it. End this war, sit down the two sides, work out an acceptable agreement. Anything is safer and better for the world than continuing down the unknowable, dangerous path that we are now on. I hope you have found this of interest. If you have, please share this video with others who might also find it interesting. If you are interested in Democracy at Work, that produces videos like this, and if you want to stay connected with us, please add your name to our mailing list, our email mailing list. And the easiest way to do that is to go to our website, democracyatwork.info, where you can do that. And of course, at that website, you can also help us pay for the costs of doing this, and we will be grateful for that as well. Thank you.